I want to welcome you to this crest deep dive entitled Growing Through Organizational Trauma, or When Living Things Get Hurt. My name is Terry Young and I work with Crest Leadership. And this is one of our deep dive offerings. We have a number of these that are going to be on our in our Crest Academy. We're providing you in this deep dive several things. Number one, we're providing you some notes that follow along the presentations. There'll be 3 very brief videos for this deep dive. And there's also another packet of material that simply overviews for you some of the things that we call crises that can happen within organizations. And as well, there's some insight there from really the father of crisis readiness, Ian Mitroff. And there's a segment on common patterns of organizational crisis that will give you insight into what happens when we go through storm moments. And that is where we want to begin. We'll provide for you a copy of the slides or the images that we want you to tap into as we go along this particular seminar or deep dive. And you can follow along there as well from those PowerPoints that are available to you. So let's dive in. When living things get hurt. We want to use the metaphor in this particular deep dive of storm moments. In every organization, congregation, there are storms that arise. Storms are common. They are things that challenge us. They're adversity. They can be a crisis. They can be something that comes out of the blue that you did not plan for because they are unpredictable. They're also varied in intensity. Some storm moments are small, brief storms. Some storms last for many days, maybe many weeks. What we know about storms is that most storms are survivable. That is, we can go through storm moments, whether they are storm moments of a particular crisis within our congregation or maybe a broader crisis. We are survivable. And these storm moments are often called crises. So what we do within this deep dive is we give you several metaphors to think about that relate to storm moments. Some have used the idea that when there's a trauma that comes to an organization, it's like a forest fire. There is some event or something that lights a fire, and that fire begins to grow. And before long, a fire can become, from a small little fire, it can become a conflagration. It can get blown up by winds. It can take on a life of its own. So the metaphor of firestorms. And we've given you an image in the materials of Sir Anthony Hopkins' house in California. And it shows his house on the bluff of a cliff side near the ocean. And around his house, there are other houses that have been destroyed. And so these firestorms are strange sometimes as to what they affect and what they don't affect. There's also a picture there of an aftermath of a tornado, a sky view of what happens when a tornado makes its way. And this is another form of a storm. And tornadoes can blow through and they cut a path. And sometimes they'll go through a neighborhood and there'll be one house that is totally destroyed, and next to it is another one with minor damage. Storm moments are strange this way as to how they affect different people in different ways. Then there's the image of a hurricane. And hurricanes are, once again, a form of a storm that can occur. And they are large, massive events. And they have wide swaths. They're different than a tornado. They're different than a firestorm. They tend to come into a community and make their way across vast amounts of territory. And then there's the earthquake. And the earthquake metaphor is the shaking that occurs. Those earthquakes can make their way into an area. And we'll talk a little bit further in the next segment about what these are all about. What we know about storms is that they reconfigure landscapes. They often have an effect upon relationships. They endanger, complicate, and shift relationships in a team, a congregation, a business. Storms also generate complex emotions for people. But what we know about storms is that they share in common certain characteristics. So when we think about living things getting hurt, a storm blows through your congregation or your organization. something happens. There are one of three things that can happen as an outgrowth or as a result of a storm. Number one is that a system, a group of people, a congregation can be destroyed. That is a possibility. The second possibility is that a congregation or organization can be weakened by a storm. That is, there's not appropriate recovery, there's not appropriate response, and the organization carries on, but they're weakened in their ongoing life. A third option is that a system, a congregation, a team, can become in time stronger out of a storm. And that is why we have put together this deep dive. There are two particular things that we hope come out of this deep dive. One is we hope that out of this crest deep dive, there's a raised awareness for you about matters related to trauma in an organization. When living things get hurt, what is actually happening, what goes on, how do people respond? The second thing we hope is that for you, there is some prompt that is given to better prepare yourself to deal with trauma, to deal with crisis, to deal with storm events, things that happen within your organization. And so we want to zero in on the fact that there are injuries that occur that are nature caused. There are also injuries that occur that are what we call human caused. The ones that are most difficult to deal with over the long term are often the ones that are caused by humans. Because we wrestle with our responsibility, but we also wrestle and struggle with our response ability. What are we to do? What are we to say when there is a crisis that is caused by a living human being within our organization? Sometimes churches are hurt by the actions of people, the behavior of people. And the church and congregation, the organization, the business is left in the wake of the damage caused by an individual. When human agents bring injury, we struggle with what to do. There are simply some storms that require a communal response. And we're going to give you a brief insight into what that involves. So this is segment one. It just simply sets the stage. We're now going to move into segment two of our videos. But we want you to stop and think about perhaps some storm events that you have experienced. And it may be the metaphor of a wildfire is appropriate. Maybe the metaphor of a tornado that blew through your community is appropriate. Maybe it was of a larger scale and it's a hurricane that comes to mind. Or maybe it is a quake event. The earth shook and it continues to shake. There are aftershocks. Think about this and then think about what are all the things that occurred in your storm event. That'll give you rich insight into what actually happens when we go through storms.